The world's most powerful leaders meet in Argentina, where the US and China agreed to a trade truce. But will it hold? Plus, the Saudi crown prince and Russian president couldn't be happier to see each other. But were other world leaders as delighted to see Mohammed bin Salman? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the G20 summit. Leaders from the world's biggest economies under one roof, and there was a lot to talk about, especially for China and the United States. This weekend saw the first face-to-face meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping since a trade war broke out earlier this year. And when two financial powerhouses go head-to-head, the global economy takes notice. At a high-stakes meeting on the sidelines of the G20, the two agreed to a truce. The US said it would hold off on imposing new tariffs, and China said it will buy more American products. But the deal is only for 90 days. And with so many points of contention still on the table, has an economic crisis been averted or just delayed? John Brain has been following the story from Buenos Aires.
On the dinner menu in Buenos Aires on Saturday night, fine food and fraternity. Months of mutual recriminations over trade apparently melting away in an instant.
The relationship is very special, the relationship that I have with President Xi, and I think that is going to be a very primary reason why we'll probably ending up getting something that will be good for China and good for the United States.
It's not quite how the US president saw the relationship back in July, when he slapped tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese imports, only for China to retaliate in kind. Now plans for additional tariffs due in January have been suspended, and further talks will be held about the existing ones.
This trade dispute has been another example of Donald Trump the disruptor, tearing up the rules and shaking up everything and everybody. He believes he can always get an improved deal, and it makes no difference to him whether he's negotiating with a fellow businessman or the leader of the world's second biggest economy.
Trump believes his decision to start the trade dispute with the Chinese has been vindicated. Not everyone is quite so sure.
I don't think he realizes the interconnections. Supply chains have become globalized. That's a world of the 21st century. And his view of the American economy is locked into one of about 1950 or 55. He's an old man.
And of course, although January is just a few weeks away, this most unpredictable of US presidents still has time to change his mind again. John Brain, the Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by Riley Walters. He's a policy analyst specializing in Asian economies at conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation. In New York is the director of the China National Association of International Studies, Victor Gao. And in Singapore, we have Steve Okun. He's a former Deputy General Counsel in the U.S. government during Bill Clinton's administration. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Steve Okun, let me begin with you. So China and the U.S. after G20 are saying, let's take a 90-day breather on tariffs and make nice for now. It's better than it was before, isn't it? Aren't we less close to the U.S. and China clashing?
No, we're still having a U.S.-China clash. The U.S. still has $250 billion in tariffs on China. Those did not go away. $50 billion at 25%, $200 billion at another 10%. We have a pending $267 billion that was threatened to go into effect January 1. That's the only thing that's been postponed. The core issue from the U.S. perspective is China's unfair trade practices when it comes to IPR. That hasn't been resolved. Maybe it will get resolved. I'm not optimistic it's going to be done in this 90-day period. So I don't see us as having a truce right now.
And so, Steve, have they just kicked the can down the road to deal with come spring 2019?
I don't know that they've necessarily... I don't think they've kicked the can. I think what they've done is said, let's see what's going to happen in this 90-day period. This 90 days gives the Chinese a sense of urgency, the U.S. administration, that something concrete needs to get done. And if it doesn't, the potential for $267 billion in additional tariffs comes, as well as the increase from 10 to 25% on the existing $200 billion in tariffs. So it really didn't kick the can. It's given it a little bit of time for discussion, but there's still a hard deadline on it. And let's see if the Trump administration holds to the rule of law under Section 301 of the United States.
Okay, so Victor Gao, according to the agreement that came out of Argentina, if at the end of this period the parties are unable to reach an agreement, the 10% tariffs will be raised to 25%. So do you agree with Steve that the ball is in the Chinese court now? They have to show the Americans that they're serious about sorting this out?
Now, first of all, what came out of Argentina is a good news for China. It's a good news for the United States. It's a good news for global economy. So we need to congratulate President Trump and President Xi Jinping of the two countries for taking the right thing. To put a halt to whatever that happened in the trade war between the two countries and to enable the two government teams to negotiate with each other. Secondly, talking about the trade war and the tariffs, there is no joy in the tariffs to be charged. It's bad for China. It's bad for the United States. If, for example, in the worst case scenario, if the United States keeps charging all these tariffs, the U.S. economy will suffer. The U.S. consumers will suffer. The U.S. farmers will lose out. That's a fact. We need to realize that. If anyone in the United States takes great joy in charging tariffs, I think they need to wake up, whatever, face the reality. Tariff is the worst thing for the United States in the philosophical sense and in the practical sense. I think the Chinese leadership need to be congratulated for keeping calm, keeping sanity, not losing temper, and in dealing with the United States as it is. No one likes tariffs. The Chinese government is not paying the money to be charged by the U.S. government. 50% of the Chinese export to the rest of the world are made by foreign companies operating in China, including companies from the United States.
Okay, so
they now ask the U.S. government to forget about charging more tariffs.
Yeah, let me take part of that and pose it to Riley Walters. Riley, Victor Gao saying, you think tariffs are good for anybody here? I mean, it's kind of ironic in a way that we're in 2018, and I guess for any students of 20th century history to see the US being, I don't know, more protectionist and the Chinese being more globalist and internationalist here. Is Victor Gao making a good point here?
Well, I think there's one person who really likes tariffs, and that's President Trump. No, I agree with him to a certain extent. Tariffs are not effective in achieving their intended goals. They definitely create a lot of cost for both U.S. and Chinese consumers. They create a lot of inefficiency in the market. And, I don't really think, we needed tariffs to get to where we are right now in the negotiation process. What came out of Argentina, I think it is a step in the right direction. Of course, the next 90 days are going to be tough, but they were always going to be tough. 2 years ago, U.S.-China negotiations were going to be tough, no matter what they were going to look like. But I think for now, what we got out of Saturday was at least a sign that, we can start making the steps in the right direction.
Steve Okun, a lot of people know what a military war looks like. They can envision it. What does a full-blown trade war look like? What happens if they can't come to an agreement come the spring of 2019? Describe what a full-blown trade war between the US and China will look like.
Well, the issue is you have to start with why the tariffs are there. The tariffs are there because the United States believes that China engages in unfair trade practices. Look at Made in China 2025. Look at China's policies to force technology transfers. Look at China's state-driven economy, which gets an unlevel playing field for all businesses, not just U.S. businesses. So what the Trump administration has done is said, we're going to use tariffs as our best lever to address those issues. I think all three of us will agree that tariffs are not the way to address those issues, and that there's other ways to get everybody together to address the core problem. And so what's going to happen is if the U.S. and China cannot come to an agreement, the U.S. then has two choices, and this is an agreement on whether China is going to modify its state-driven economy. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's realistic. If that doesn't happen, then the U.S. is going to have to decide, do we stay with tariffs and clearly harm ourselves, but we think we're going to put more pressure on China, or does the U.S. move to a more multilateral framework, try and fix the WTO, trying to get to these 21st century trade issues, maybe come back and join the TPP, which the Trump administration never should have left. That's what the U.S. is going to have to decide if after this 90-day period, China isn't going to change the way the U.S. wants China to change.
Victor Gao, there's a feeling from the Americans fundamentally that the Chinese don't play fair. And this is from Republicans and Democrats. The Chinese are not playing fair. This is an uneven playing field, as we heard from Steve. How do the Chinese feel about that? What's their response?
Well, first of all, look at what the Trump administration has been accusing of a whole bunch of other countries, including China. They are accusing these countries of all kinds of things. Now, when we zoom in on the U.S. government's accusation of China in terms, for example, RPR violation and forced transfer of technology, give me one single example of forced transfer of technologies by China and transferred to China by foreign multinationals. No, I think these foreign multinationals are very sophisticated players. They have their own protection about their fundamental interest in their RPR rights. And I don't think you have any real concrete example of forced transfer of technologies to the Chinese companies endorsed by the Chinese government. So when we talk about RPR protection, we all need to protect RPR rights, including the Chinese government, including the Chinese companies. And we welcome the United States and the US companies to work with China to help us to provide better protection to RPR rights. China, after all, now produces more RPR rights than any other country in the world. It is in China's own interest if we get to know RPR protection better, and if we do a better job in RPR protection. Now, you asked about the trade war.
Right. Okay, go ahead. Finish your point. Yeah, what will it look like,
You asked about the trade war.
Yeah.
A total trade war between China and the United States will be probably a devastating blow to international trade. And the world, after the Chinese-American trade war, will be someone we no longer understand. So American leaders and the Chinese leaders should be both aware of the dire consequences of a full-blown trade war between China and the United States. It's not good for China. It's bad for the United States. It's bad for the whole world. Okay, so Riley Walters, I'm not going to treat Victor Gao as a spokesman for the entire country, but I think in many ways he provides the rationalization and the type of thinking behind the Chinese business and political practice vis-a-vis the world. How does that square with you when you look at how the Chinese do business and how they express their soft power as well? Does he make sense?
I think what he's touching at is sort of the benevolent government idea, the idea that, you know, just because you're working for the government, that doesn't mean there aren't corrupt officials. You know, it's the private businesses who are scheming to, you know, create a competitive advantage for themselves to the detriment of either, you know, the Chinese economy or the Chinese government. I don't necessarily believe this is true. We have seen laws. There are laws in the book that require joint venture requirements for American companies, the transfer of intellectual property. We have, you know, surveys that say, you know, U.S. companies are not necessarily explicitly, but implicitly, it's implied that they have to transfer technology when they either sign into a joint venture, or if, you know, one day someone comes a knocking, you're not sure whether they're a party official who can make or break your company in China. And so, you know what USTR has raised on the Section 301 tariffs, these are real complaints. There are a lot of these things. I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say it's $600 billion worth of year of intellectual property theft. Even USTR themselves thinks that the annual cost to U.S. businesses is around $50 billion. But I think going forward, you know, there are a lot of improvements. We don't necessarily need China's involvement in this to make a lot of these sort of fixes that we want to see. We can do more unilateral and multilateral things with or without China.
And Steve Okun, you mentioned that the U.S. might take a multilateral approach, might try to reform the World Trade Organization or do things through that institution. But given that in Buenos Aires, we heard Trump mention once again that he's got a plan to get out of NAFTA. He's a man who doesn't like these international institutions. Any international institution with an acronym Trump doesn't like. So what's the likelihood that the U.S. is going to work with these international institutions in order to solve this?
Well, what's happening, certainly sitting here in Singapore and seeing what's happening in Asia, is that countries aren't waiting for the U.S. to act, and they're not waiting for China to act. It's why the Comprehensive Partnership for the Trans-Pacific Partnership has gone forward, the CPTPP, a free trade agreement of 11 countries. It goes into effect at the end of the year. Because we as businesses across Asia, we need trade agreements that represent what is doing business in the 21st century, that get to IPR protection, that get to level playing fields with state-owned enterprises, that address environmental issues and labor issues and cross-border data flows and all of that. And so people move forward without the U.S., without China. We're not in a world anymore where it's going to be the U.S. leads or China leads. We're voting, people are voting, businesses are voting, governments in Asia are voting to move on their own. It's going to be a lot more difficult. It's going to be a lot slower. But that's where the world's going as the U.S. and China are engaged in this battle, which does not seem to be ceasing or have a truce anytime soon.
Victor Gao, long story short, is the U.S. just jealous that you guys are getting in on the act?
Now, I think many in China are confused as to what exactly the United States is up to. If they are really caring for the trading balance between China and the United States, then we have a lot to talk about. Trading balance between China and the United States is not good for the United States. It's also not good for China. We need to make the trade more balanced between the two countries. If the United States is really worried about Chinese economy eventually becoming bigger than that of the United States, you cannot stop it. It's getting bigger. And China one day will be larger than the United States economy. And that's a mega trend. You cannot fight against that. You need to come to terms with that prospect. It may happen in 5 years, 10 years or 15 years, but it's happening. So Americans need to wake up to that reality. You cannot stand in the way of a big mega trend. Otherwise, it will be buried by the mega trend.
Okay.
So what exactly is the American up to? I think if we know that better between China and the United States, we can engage each other in a more realistic way. We can come up with all the good solutions which will work for China and will work for the United States. The world today no longer want to have a bully on the block. The United States and the American people at their heart are decent people.
Okay,
and the
but what's
Chinese
interesting is the Americans are saying you guys are bullying
people.
in terms of trade.
I think we can get along.
Mr. Gao, yeah, I've got to wrap. The interesting thing is the Americans are saying you guys are doing the bullying here. There's a 3-month period now, and it's going to be fascinating to see because I guess there's going to be a bit of game theory going on and second guessing on both sides. But for the moment, a cautious optimism coming out of Buenos Aires. Gentlemen, I thank you for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Riley Walters, Victor Gao, and Steve Okun. Well, aside from Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, one of the most watched leaders at the G20 was actually Saudi Arabia's crown prince. The summit was Mohammed bin Salman's first meeting with Western leaders since the Jamal Khashoggi killing. So, how was he received? Well, Putin couldn't have been happier, but that was followed by an apparent telling off by Macron. All the while, an Argentinian judge agreed to a request from Human Rights Watch to investigate the crown prince over possible war crimes in Yemen. So, did Mohammed bin Salman's trip advance his international reputation or deepen his isolation? Here's John Brain again.
Surely the most extraordinary image of the entire G20 summit. Two world leaders currently viewed by many as international pariahs, greeting each other like long-lost friends. Of course, Vladimir Putin is used to being the problem child at these gatherings, but for Mohammed bin Salman, this must have all felt very new. At times completely ignored by many here, at least in public. Donald Trump, however, made it clear he didn't have a problem with him, even though there was no sit-down meeting between the two men.
At least Donald Trump's approach has been completely straightforward. He's described the killing of Khashoggi as horrible, but says he won't let it destroy his relationship with Saudi Arabia. But you get the impression that the European leaders here have been tying themselves in knots. On the one hand, they want to express their outrage. On the other, they don't want to put at risk all those lovely Saudi investment dollars.
This was the British Prime Minister's solution. Theresa May posed for pictures with Mohammed bin Salman, but smiling was out of the question. And there was this curious exchange with the French president. Apparently, Emmanuel Macron is saying to the Crown Prince, "I'm worried, I told you." And later, "You never listened to me." Was this a reference to Jamal Khashoggi? The Crown Prince himself didn't seem unduly affected by his reception.
Clearly, from the moment he arrived in Buenos Aires, being the first leader, it's him showing the world, I'm not afraid to be here, I deserve to be here, and I'm not afraid. And in essence, it's kind of him saying the G20 can't do anything about me and my actions. I can thumb my nose at the democratic global norms and get away with it.
But will Mohammed bin Salman be attending next year's G20? And if so, what reception will he receive there? John Brain, The Newsmakers, Buenos Aires.
Let's go to our panel now. Ahmed bin Shamsi joins me from New York. He's Human Rights Watch's Advocacy and Communications Director for the Middle East and North Africa. In Riyadh, we have Saudi and Gulf Affairs expert Mohammed Al-Qubayban. And with me in the studio is Ahmed Badir. He's the founder of the Justice for Jamal campaign. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Mohammed Al-Qubayban, let me begin with you, sir. After the G20, was the summit in Buenos Aires a success for your Crown Prince?
Good evening, sir, and thanks for having me again. Inshallah, it will be good. And as you saw, the visits for His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed was very important. And you knew the G20, it talks about the economics issues. And I thought that the results, not yet been received the report and forward to the king. But overall, according to the media, the Saudi media went with the king, with His Royal Highness. There was lots of appreciation. There was lots of good news coming on. The main point that those type of let's say, of the meetings of meetings, we'd like it to continue for more stability in the whole world. And I thought that the prince had maybe 4 to 5 side meetings with some presidents. Otherwise, everything I thought within 2 days. It's not that enough, but what we received from the media overall seems to be a good meetings, and hopefully it will continue again.
Okay, before I bring in the other guests, let me ask you if you were surprised that the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, didn't receive much heat over the killing of Jamal Khashoggi.
Well, I didn't think so. This is the very, very important point. Now, sir, you knew there was more than 30 persons. Yes, 48 hours. But I didn't think so. The way we looked at it, it's concur with whatever you just mentioned. I thought the prince was there, welcomed by the president of the meetings, scheduled to meet some of the presidents. Maybe you're talking about the picture. The pictures, as you know, there is a protocol for the pictures, whoever going to be in the front and whoever be in the second lane and whoever going to be in the third lane. Now, don't tell me that during the dinner time or the lunch time they did not meet. I didn't think so, but nobody saw it. So maybe you took the opinion from the major shots or major picture.
Actually, I'm not doing that.
When they get together.
I'm saying it the other way around. I'm saying that it didn't seem as if anybody questioned him, took him on, isolated him or anything like that. Yes, we saw a little cell phone video with Emmanuel Macron, but it's inconclusive. We don't exactly know what they were talking about. I'm saying, aren't you surprised that nobody told him, hey, we need answers with regards Jamal Khashoggi, that nobody took him to task?
Oh, of course, yeah. There is no sense of asking such a thing like this. The Saudi government stands already show what they have, already admit the crime, already committed, let's say, a group to work with the Turkey government. And I think that the Saudi government did the best that they can do. Most, let's say, the official stance of the other governments, they recognized the Saudi stance and they took it as is.
And that's
whatever happening in the media.
Okay, that's important. Okay, and it's good to hear that from you. Let me bring in Human Rights Watch, Ahmed bin Shamsi. You guys wanted the Argentinians to possibly arrest him. They didn't do that. And he seems to have gone for the summit, had his good meetings, spoken about the economy, spoken about Vision 2030, and he got on a plane and left. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's not that simple. I wouldn't say that our objective was that the Argentinians arrest him. I mean, that's a pretty, simplified way to put it. Our main objective is that justice is served, and justice is a process. So what we did is file a motion with the Argentinian judiciary so they open an investigation on his possible implication in grave international crimes, including possible war crimes in Yemen and torture of Saudi citizens within Saudi Arabia, and also the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. What we did is send the information that we had to the Argentinian judiciary so they look into his role in this, and they responded to our call. The judicial authorities took steps towards investigating his connection with those alleged war crimes. And I mean, I don't think that he spent such a good week with that threat looming over his head. And most of all, the suspicions over his role within that collective of heads of state. So if our real objective is that the world starts to pay attention that very grave and severe crimes are happening under the possible direct responsibility of the Crown Prince, and this is happening right now. The world is paying attention.
Okay, let me bring in the other Ahmed Badir. Are you satisfied by Mohammed al-Kubayban's claim that the Saudi government has done all it can and they're prosecuting those involved in the killing of Khashoggi, no more, no less?
That might sound well in Riyadh, but for the rest of the world, it's not. They're not satisfied. The world is not satisfied. And the way that Mohammed bin Salman was received and treated at the G20 summit, I have to differ with you. He was in some ways treated like a pariah. He wasn't celebrated. This wasn't as it was before Jamal Khashoggi. There's a huge difference. And on the same day that they were meeting in Buenos Aires, there were reports that came out in the Wall Street Journal that came close to some sort of smoking gun of all these text messages that Mohammed bin Salman himself was sending to his top advisor that was overseeing, Saud al-Qahtani, overseeing the murder of Khashoggi.
But if he was really treated as a pariah, don't you think the Saudis would have freaked out? I mean, okay, we're stringing together a bunch of things. Macron telling him, you never listen to me.
He was being reprimanded.
Yeah, but okay, so that's from that one video. We have the UK and the French and the Canadians come up and say, yes, we want a full investigation, but beyond that.
I mean, the forum itself didn't allow for that.
Did anybody really say, listen, you're responsible?
The way he was treated, he was isolated. The only one that really embraced him is Putin. The others didn't want to be seen with him at all, or in one-on-one meetings, there aren't those images that they want to celebrate being seen with Mohammed bin Salman. He was treated like a pariah. In fact, the fact that he didn't spend his time in Buenos Aires touring places, he was stuck inside the residence, afraid that he may get arrested. He was stuck, using the immunity of the sovereignty of the embassy or the residence, the official residence of the ambassador. Those are the only places. He didn't stay at a hotel as his custom to go out and rent out the entire Ritz-Carlton or the Four Seasons hotels. No, he stayed within the residence for protection, fearing arrest, fearing that the prosecutors in Argentina may make a move. And that's kind of the cloud of doubt and fear that hangs over Mohammed bin Salman. And I think in Riyadh, they may not necessarily be saying in the media, but they're starting to realize that Mohammed bin Salman is becoming a liability, and he's not going to be able to be effective to push the agenda of Saudi Arabia, forward. And this issue is not going away. Okay. And the fact that President Erdogan did not let it go. He used almost half of his press conference to continue to push this issue on the one of the biggest stages, world stages over the weekend. Right.
Mohammed al-Kubayban, let's bring in the Saudi.
Yes, sir, I'm coming to it. Just I wanna answer back, or just as interact with Mr. Ahmed. Ahmed, I mean, what you were trying to explain a while ago is almost your feeling toward the meetings. And this is not the way, I think, sir, to critique the meetings, or if you want to evaluate the Mohammed bin Salman stance. Now, everybody knew that the Saudi Arabia let me take it this way. Saudi Arabia is very important to the whole world. Now, whatever you're saying, reports, and you're saying that he did not stay in the hotel where he's supposed to stay, or you were talking about there is a messages between him and Qahtani, or whatever things you were trying to say that he's isolated from the presidents, that the way you look at it. Let's take it different, sir. Let's look at the government's stance, how they said it. Imran, he just maybe answer you back that he met Theresa May, he sat with the French president, and he met some other president, even Chinese, and the Argentinian. So look at it as an overall. Now, if we follow up the media really it will take us to 1,000 different ways. But let's take the official stance from the governments. That's how I looked at it. Yes,
but again,
there is still more information.
Certainly.
Just one last point, sir, regarding the crime itself. Yes, there is more information coming in.
Right.
The Saudis are doing their best with the Turkish government to solve these issues.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Just a point of housekeeping from my perspective. When you say that, and I've had to say this on the show before, when you say that we should take the official Saudi government's position as the definitive word, if we did that with the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, we would have gone nowhere. We would have had no idea where he was. We would have had to believe them at the first instance when they said, hey, he went to the embassy and we don't know what happened to him afterwards. If it wasn't for pressure from the Turkish government, we would not have known. Putting that aside, let me come back to Ahmed bin Shamsi. Do you think that we are now at a point, as we get to the end of 2018, where there's intense scrutiny on Saudi Arabia as a country vis-a-vis its human rights situation at home, as a country at war in Yemen, and as an ally of these Western countries that claim to only support countries that push for democratic values and so on and so forth? Is that where we are now, Ahmed bin Shamsi?
Yes, exactly. This is where we are now, and I think that scrutiny will only increase. The murder of Jamal Khashoggi at least allowed the world to open their eyes on what's going on in Saudi Arabia, and under the responsibility of Saudi Arabia and of the Crown Prince specifically as Minister of Defense and as the chief commander of the Saudi army in Yemen. I mean, we have been ringing the bell for years now, since the Yemen war started, saying that the coalition and the direction of Saudi Arabia is committing grave violations of the laws of war, some of which are amount to war crimes, are attacking civilians, attacking schools, attacking markets, weddings, funerals, that there are civilians dead by the thousands, and without any conclusive investigation. We have been also ringing the bell on domestic abuse within Saudi Arabia. Very recently, we reported the case of several women's rights activists who have been tortured in detention centers in Saudi Arabia. All those things are not new. They have been happening in the past month, in the past years. Now, what changed after the murder of Mr. Khashoggi is that the world is paying attention, and is that wherever the Crown Prince goes now in the world, well, he might need serious legal advice, because what happened in Argentina might happen elsewhere because of the principle of universal jurisdiction. You know, thankfully, this principle exists, and no one now is totally immune of the long reach of the law.
Despite all of that, Ahmed Badir, at the end of the day, politics is politics. Saudi Arabia is a counterfoil to Iran in the region for the United States and many Sunni Arab countries, as they call them. And also there's a lot of money involved in weapons sales and just general business, oil. Ultimately, it's not worth anyone's trouble to cut ties with the Saudis. That's the reality, isn't it, Ahmed?
I think even President Erdogan himself is saying they don't need to cut ties with the Saudis. Saudi Arabia continues to be an important country, and it's too important to put it in the hands of someone like Mohammed bin Salman, who doesn't have the experience, who's very volatile and increasing instability, who has in a way hijacked the government of Saudi Arabia. Yes, it's a monarchy, yet he has now consolidated the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of the Interior, the Foreign Affairs. All of these are now within his power, and he's misusing it. And it was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. There are hundreds, if not thousands of other Jamal Khashoggis within Saudi Arabia that are suffering, that are facing torture, imprisonment, including women who are being raped. So there are many allegations that the people in the West, leaders in the West, are uncomfortable continuing. They want to preserve the relationship with Saudi Arabia, but they think Mohammed bin Salman is the wrong person. And I think people within Saudi Arabia are starting to realize that same issue.
On that theme, Mohammed Al-Kubayban, I have deep respect for you, sir. You always, you come onto the show, you're not afraid of tough questions, and I appreciate that. Let me ask you directly, sir, if you wanted to criticize Mohammed bin Salman from that studio in Riyadh on this show, would you be able to, or would you fear the consequences?
Sir, we have lots of channels to pass your opinion to the governments. First of all, as an Islamic way. Second, as the Saudis societies, we have a chance to meet the king. If you have any problem, that you can go and speak up. You can go to His Royal Highness Palace. There is some certain days and you can speak up. To criticize people just for criticize, I didn't think so. This is good for the country itself. I didn't think so. This is good for the community.
If you had to tweet
itself.
out and say that Mohammed bin Salman is not doing a good job, would that be the last we heard of you?
What is the point? What is the point?
If you believe he's not doing a good job.
I mean,
Saud,
no, sir. Just even though this is a small point, but
Ahmed.
No, just Ahmed. Let me, Ahmed. Please, you throw a lot of points. I wish that I can answer you back. But Imran, he's trying to ask, will I criticize the king, or will I criticize the crown prince, or will I criticize the government? Of course, I can criticize in case of there is something we see it's important for the national security. We see it's important for our relationship, or it's important for our ethics. We could do this, and trust me, sir, I've been in the King Palace. We talked about some problems, and he was listening, and he always say this: if you have any problems, I will be ready to solve the problems. And there is 100 of stories. It happens.
The king may be more. The king
there is a
may
discipline.
Be more open-minded.
There is a discipline. That's my point.
Salman al-Ouda.
You throw.
Muhammad. Salman al-Ouda tweeted one tweet and basically said, you know, I wish, he made like some sort of like prayer. I wish that the brothers in the Gulf region would come together, meaning referring to the problem with Qatar. And for that, he was arrested right afterward. He wasn't even criticizing the crown prince. There are people that are being arrested and put away for...
You're looking at it as a different way. Salman al-Ouda, my opinion myself, I think this man need to re-look at his let's say mechanism, his way of trying to pass the information.
He was seeking to bring people together. He wasn't even criticizing.
No. There is a history. There is a history
himself.
Okay, so let me put Al-Ouda
we have a
aside.
wise government.
Okay, let me put him aside. And Mohammed, you've given it a good shot answering the question. Ahmed bin Shamsi, 20 seconds, please, because I know you want to jump in. We're out of time. 20 seconds. Final word to you, Ahmed bin Shamsi.
What about all the dissidents that are in jail right now? What about Raif Badawi? What about Samar Badawi? What about Abu Khair? What about all the brave women who pushed for women's driving, who are now in jail after right before the driving was allowed? I mean, there is absolutely no space remaining for dissidents in Saudi Arabia now. The situation is really serious, and the world should pay attention.
Ahmed bin Shamsi, Mohammed Al-Qubayban, and Ahmed Badir, I sincerely thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Thanks again. Still to come on the program, minutes after Mexico swears in its new president, a new plan is unveiled to solve the migrant crisis at the US border. But will it work? We have a special report on tensions in Tijuana. Deeply concerning and unmanageable. They're the words of aid agencies working at the overcrowded migrant camp in Tijuana, Mexico. Conditions there are worsening, but thousands more people from Central America are expected to arrive soon, desperate to seek asylum in the United States. President Donald Trump has promised they'll never be allowed in. This weekend, Mexico swore in its new president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, and one of his first acts in office was announcing a new plan to solve the crisis. But will it work? Nicole Johnston reports from Mexico.
After 5 weeks of walking, sleeping and living on the side of a road, this is what it comes down to. The last 100 kilometers of road between Mexicali and their final destination, Tijuana, on the US-Mexico border.
Vamos para Tijuana. First, we want to go to Tijuana, and we thank Mexico for its help and the journalists. It gives us security. We are leaving my country because there's a lot of violence. We are walking fast because the gangs don't let us live in peace, and they force us to become drug dealers.
They aren't fleeing war, but violence and poverty in gang-ridden Central America. Their goal is to reach the United States and claim for asylum. This is the final leg of their journey to the United States border, to the city of Tijuana. They have about 100 kilometers left to cover, and they'll be hoping that they can either catch a ride in a truck or a bus, and that's why they're all running right now to catch any transportation they can. What a place to wait. A filthy, overcrowded camp on a sports ground in Tijuana. The city council calls it a humanitarian crisis and says it's running out of money to support them.
Pues definitivamente este refugio en un inicio se piensa para 1000 personas.
When we set up this shelter, it was planned for 1,000 people, but now there are 6,000. So the conditions in the camp have gone downhill. It's become very complicated to keep the area clean because the migrants aren't helping. We have a lot of volunteers, but it's not enough. They're still surrounded by garbage.
And wastewater. It's flowing through the camp, turning open-air showers and the toilet block into a muddy, putrid swamp. In the middle of all of this, we meet 4-year-old Montse from Honduras. She shows us around the camp.
Mi mamá se baña esta, y yo me baño esta.
And pretends to be a monster. There are more than 1,000 children in the camp and more than 30 babies. Officials say 1/3 of people are sick. At the border, people leave their name in a book. They're given a number to wait their turn and cross to apply for asylum. But the US is processing less than 100 people a day, and thousands are waiting. Just over a week ago, the frustration became too much. 500 people ran to the wall. US border guards responded with tear gas. And US President Donald Trump said once again, they will never be allowed in.
If you look at what's marching up, that's an invasion. That's an invasion.
They started their journey with hope, and as word spread, the migrant caravan grew until there were thousands. This inspired more caravans. Another 2 are on the way. At the same time, the Trump administration turned against them. The president introduced an order denying the right to claim asylum to anyone who crossed the border illegally. The goal was to funnel people through designated ports of entry. A federal court has now temporarily blocked the order. Meanwhile, in Mexico, a new president, Lopez Obrador, took office on Saturday. He's already offered asylum and temporary work permits to refugees. Back in the camp, wind beats the tents. Rain follows. Dumped on the doorstep of their American dream, this wave of humanity has now become Mexico's problem. Nicole Johnston, The Newsmakers, Tijuana.
What's the view from the US side of the Mexican border? Well, to discuss Trump's response and more, let's go to our guests in California. In Tecate, we have Robert Crooks. He's the founder of the Mountain Minutemen, a militia group that says it assists U.S. Border Patrol agents in preventing undocumented migrants entering the U.S. And in San Diego, we have Enrique Morones. He's the founder and director of Border Angels, an organization that helps keep Mexican migrants safe across the border. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Enrique, let me begin with you. So the Trump administration says not a single one of these people should actually cross over. They're Mexico's problem, not the problem of the United States. Your response to that is what?
Well, in the last 5 years, we had a dramatic drop in undocumented migration from Mexico. That has nothing to do with Trump. It's a situation where in Mexico, there's a lot more work, so people are staying there. Now the largest group are Central Americans. But undocumented migration is down about 45% in the last 5 years. And what people are doing is they're looking at the caravan and they see this large group of people. And Trump, of course, is using his hate rhetoric to try to stir up trouble. But people that cross usually cross legally, they get in line and so forth. Now Trump is even trying to block that. not letting people qualify for asylum. Most undocumented people that have died as a result of the wall that was built in 1994 did not qualify for visas. So we need to have humane immigration policies. The countries that they're coming from should have a better opportunities for them. A lot of that has to do with U.S. policies in Central America and the demand for drugs. And the only people that have really been on the border to work on this before Trump was the Border Patrol. Because, of course, the Minutemen groups, they were shut down a long time ago, and they really never helped. They just try to stir up trouble. But we're glad that that the people are settling. There's a lot of people that are staying in Mexico. Less people are coming. And we know that we're going to have humane policies in the future once Trump's out of office.
Okay, so Robert Crooks, why not give these people a chance at a proper, humane, legal asylum process? They come, they state their case, and the government gets to decide whether they come in or not.
Well, they had the opportunity when they got to Mexico, and they denied asylum in Mexico. That changed the whole dynamics. They became invaders then.
What's so threatening about them to you?
What's so threatening? Well, we got a country that's a sovereign nation. It's run by the rule of law. You don't come creeping through the bushes in the middle of the night and hit a welfare office and expect to get fed. This is not the Goodwill. This is not the Salvation Army. This is the United States of America. By God, we live by a country. We're a country of laws.
Yeah.
Coming across the border in the middle of the night is not legal immigration and will not be tolerated.
Right. And I see from your hat and from the sticker behind you, you're a supporter of the president. The president sent the military, and we saw some of those people trying to cross the border tear gassed. Were you satisfied by that response?
Yeah, I have no problem with that whatsoever. Whatever force is necessary to stop this invasion, I support 100%. Like I said, we quoted already. I said today is rubber, tomorrow's lead. Get it through their heads. You're not coming across. This is America, not Central
When
America.
you say tomorrow's lead, does that mean that these people should be killed?
If they don't get it through their head and they can't get in this country, what are you going to do to them?
If you'll allow me, I Googled you just before the show, right? And a Southern Poverty Law Center profile came up. I'm sure you're aware of this from 2007, the SPLC. And it said that and for the sake of our viewers, there was a video where you purportedly shared it with the co-founder of Mountain Minutemen, Jim Gilchrist, calling men across the border cockroaches and putos. And I apologize for that word, but in this context, it's quite important. And you shot at them, or whoever was in the video shot at them. What does that tell us about your motivations for what you do?
All right, stand by. The video you're talking about was a hoax that we put together and had never happened. It was a joke, a hoax. And the Southern Poverty Law Center, with their lack of credibility, turned that into some hate thing, which everybody jumped all over. But in fact, it was a blessing. That little video brought national attention to a problem we have in America, and that's our unsecure border.
But do you believe they are cockroaches who deserve to be shot?
Hey, you know what, buddy? This is a physical anomaly. It's the only place on earth where toilet flushes uphill. The people that come across this line in the middle of the night, they're not your, they can't make it to a port of entry. That's why they come through the bushes at night. They're ditch crickets. They're criminals. They're gangbangers. They're
what about
punks,
the kids?
Terrorists.
Are they toilet water as well?
All right, you're going to twist it into some kind of hate. All right, listen
to me. They are kids.
I said a physiological anomaly by toilet flushing uphill. It means that they're not sending their best. All the coming uphill. I mean, you're not getting doctors and lawyers across the fence in the middle of the night, for crying out loud.
Enrique Morones, and I apologize for not coming to you earlier, but I wanted to sort of set a baseline because Robert is the type of person who would be satisfied with what the president is doing, wanting to build the wall, and with these current policies. What does that mean for you and the work you do, Enrique?
Well, the United States is the only country in the Americas that has walls. It's the only country in the world that separates children from their parents, puts the children in cages, and now they're tear gassing the children. Little dog Crooks here, that video, once it was exposed about him shooting a migrant, and he had been drinking like he is right now, that's a very dangerous situation because these types of racists are very, very dangerous. The Minuteman movement was shut down a long time ago, and they were started before this person came along. You know, they're looking for attention, but that hate is real. That hate is real. People are being shot. People are being attacked. Even the Border Patrol is against these type of vigilante groups. They're very, very dangerous. We need to have humane policies. Undocumented migration has dropped dramatically, as I mentioned. And every country in the world is a country of laws. North Korea is a country of laws. So that means nothing. But you have racism everywhere, like this Crooks character. Fortunately, they represent a very small percentage of the population. That's why Trump is the most unpopular president that we've had in our lifetime. That's why a lot of people didn't vote in November of 2016. And the whole world is paying the price. We need to have humane policies on both sides of the border. We're working on that as Border Angels, a humanitarian group. We have received tremendous support because even in the darkest times, like right now with Trump, there's bright lights. And those are the dreamers, the Parkland 4 students, the people that are saying, hey, let's treat people with dignity and respect. Love is an action, not just a word. Right now, we're receiving unprecedented support. I was in Tijuana yesterday. I'm going to Tijuana again this week several times to say, migrantes bienvenidos, migrants welcome. And we embrace that. We know most of the countries on both sides of the border, not just Mexico. Most of the people that are coming now are not from Mexico. They're from Central America. But before the Central Americans and the Mexicans came, there was the Italians, the Germans, the Italians, and they come the only way they can. There's no legal way for most of them to enter. The undocumented migration has dropped dramatically. Let's work on solutions, on working together. Let's see how we can embrace this situation with kindness, love, and intelligence. So that's not what's happening right
Robert,
now. So, Robert,
your answer is lead. Why don't you want to listen to Enrique? He's got a humane policy here. He wants to welcome people in need.
See, he comes on, he's talking, he's lying to you. First thing he said, I'm drunk. I mean, it's 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning here in Los Angeles or San Diego, and I'm not drinking sober. We've been in this operation for the past 13 years. We work flawlessly with the United States Border Patrol. The United States Border Patrol love the Minutemen. They love the Mountain Minutemen. For 10 years, we've been working hand in hand with the United States Border Patrol without a hitch. We're the only civilian entity on the planet that works with a federal law enforcement agency and never had a hitch. And Enrique knows this. Enrique knows he's not welcome on the border here. He knows he's not welcome at Patriot Point. He knows that nobody on the border wants him down here because he's a traitor and liar. Like he's trying to turn this around to some racist thing. It's got nothing to do with race. It's got to do with rule of law.
Very finally, Enrique. Okay, Robert. Very finally, Enrique. The Mexican president has a plan with those Central American countries. They're trying to solve the issue at its roots. Do you support that?
Yes, we're excited about the new president, Manuel Lopez Obrador. He wants to work with the Central Americans in helping their situation. That's something encouraging, sort of like a Marshall Plan type of a situation. But Mexico is not at fault of why the Central Americans are leaving. The U.S. has a lot to do with that, the interference in their policies, the demand for the illegal drugs, the taking of their natural resources. So let's work on solutions instead of finger pointing. I'm actually on the border right now, where we are very, very welcome. We were there, like I said, yesterday, and we're going to continue to do our work along the border. And we know that this situation will pass. Even in the darkest moments, there's bright lights. And love has no borders.
Okay, gentlemen, it's been really good to talk to two people who both work on the border for very different reasons to very different ends. Robert Crooks and Enrique Morones, thank you for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, will the Democratic Republic of Congo have its first peaceful transfer of power? We look at the country's upcoming presidential election as Joseph Kabila steps down after 18 years at the helm. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.